As little as 150 years ago, the landscape of the coastal plains of the southeastern United States may have looked something like this in the summertime. "90 million contiguous acres of longleaf pine forest, stretching from coastal Texas to Virginia and down into central Florida. These trees grow as tall as 120 feet, up to 3 feet in diameter, and live more than 500 years. This open, sunny, park-like habitat is one of the most biologically diverse ecosystems on Earth.
Once you get to know the fauna and the flora, where once the longleaf pine shaded all, you become increasingly amazed at the diversity of other plants and animals.
It's impressive how many species can be packed into such a small area, and a lot of them are endemic or native to only found in longleaf pine systems. So a lot of rare plant and animal species that find their home here.
More than 900 plant species are found in this landscape and nowhere else. The remnant forest provides home to many unique and vulnerable animal species, like gopher tortoises, red cockaded woodpeckers, and indigo snakes. Longleaf timber is prized for its strength and straightness, and after the Civil War, supplied the South with a vital commodity.
The fate of the original old-growth forest was sealed as a consequence of the Reconstruction following the Civil War.
The sap of longleaf, when distilled, offered other prized and profitable utilitarian products, naval stores, and turpentine. By the early 1900s, the coastal plain produced 70% of the world's supply of these products. Over time, much of the longleaf ecosystem slowly converted to agriculture, dramatically fragmenting the once sprawling habitat. Today, only about 3% remains, about 4 million acres. Just 1/10 of 1% of that is considered old growth, undisturbed virgin forest. Another contributor to the loss of the longleaf landscape was a U.S. forest policy of fire suppression.
It wasn't long ago that we thought fire was bad. We now understand through the work of the pioneering fire ecologists that fire is a critical component of this ecosystem. It's an ecosystem where fire is as important a part of the functioning of this system as water or sunlight. If you take fire away from a longleaf pine ecosystem, it turns into another kind of an ecosystem. So fire maintains this particular structure. It maintains this particular combination of plants and animals that grow here.
Fire is good for the system and is necessary. All these plants that you see out here, the hundreds of plant species associated with the longleaf pine forest, are invigorated by fire. Naturally, this ecosystem would have burned approximately every 2 to 5 years, depending on the community type. And in the absence of fire, many of the species associated with longleaf pine cannot regenerate themselves. Also, wiregrass, which is a dominant species across most of the longleaf pine forests in Georgia, it has to have fire to produce seeds, and not just any fire. It has to have fire during what we call the lightning season. So from mid-April through the end of June approximately. I mean, if it's not burned during that time period, it will not produce seeds.
Prior to European settlement, scientists theorized that seasonal lightning ignited small fires that smoldered for weeks, slowly moving throughout the landscape. Regular fire clears the land of competing hardwoods, and the resulting ash provides vital nutrients to deficient sandy soils. Longleaf trees and much of the ground cover plants have many adaptations that help them survive and take advantage of fire.
Wiregrass helps carry the fire through the forest. So it provides kind of a structure for these pine needles. So it keeps the pine needles up above the ground so they dry. So the pine needles are extremely flammable, and the wiregrass needles itself are also very flammable. So it carries the fire quickly through the forest. Longleaf pine itself is the most fire resistant of all of the southern pines. It has to have fire to have that clean seed bed to germinate.
Remarkably, a recently burned area will completely recover in just a few weeks, rejuvenated and bursting with new life. A quintessential animal found in longleaf pine forest makes its home high up in the trees, the red-cockaded woodpecker, or RCW.
They're about the size, a little bit smaller than the cardinal, and one of 9 woodpeckers found in the southeastern United States. They're unique in that they have an extremely large home range, and so they have to have a lot of trees to feed on in order to survive and reproduce. And so their home ranges can be as small as 50 acres and can be as large as 1,000 acres.
So the life history and ecology of red-cockaded woodpeckers is very special. They are the only bird in North America that excavates and uses cavities in living pine. These pine trees have to be at least 75, 80 years of age, and that's because it has to have sufficient heartwood in the center of the tree that's no longer active. It's not sappy wood.
Average cavity development takes as long as 2.5, 4 years to develop a cavity. And then once that bird is in a cavity in a living tree, it's fireproofed against fire in that system, so that living tree isn't going to burn out from beneath it. It's a generational asset, if you want to think of it that way. It takes a long time to build a cavity, and then once the primary breeding male dies, typically one of his sons inherits that cavity through a little competition. Mom disperses typically, and another female is recruited into that cluster. But it's something that is perpetuated through time as an asset.
The birds live in familial groups called clusters and often have many cavities within their territory.
This bird has become a cooperative breeder because cavities take so long for them to develop. They've developed a life history strategy where the males typically stick around and help mom and dad bring off successive broods. The females disperse looking for a single male, solitary male on the landscape.
As longleaf pine forest became fragmented and diminished during the 19th century, red-cockaded woodpeckers lost vital habitat.
These birds numbered on the landscape of probably 1 million, 1.2 million groups, we estimate, back in the 17th century. By 1970, under the Endangered Species Act, it was thought that there was probably 3,000 groups of these birds left, and mostly on national forests, military reservations, and some on private lands. So when you're creating a population from scratch, we install artificial cavities in order to give them a place to roost and then subsequently nest. We climb a tree with Swedish climbing ladders. The box is a box with basically an entrance hole and a roost chamber inside of it that's about 3 inches by 9 inches in diameter. And we pull out our chainsaw after we've scraped and flaked the tree down, and we install the box in the tree. Putty it down so that the weather doesn't get in and cause a rot pocket in the living tree, and shim it in tight, and then paint it and dress it up, and then within a half hour you have a cavity that a bird can be roosting and nesting in. And you know, this evening a bird could technically be roosting in that cavity.
To translocate a bird, you need to know who you're taking, and the only way that you can know that is to mark them, and we mark them with USGS aluminum bands, of which they have unique serial numbers on them that's unique to any bird in the world. We put colored leg bands on them as well. And those are arranged in unique combinations, you know, the position and color patterns. Basically, we can identify a bird without having to have it in the hand.
The ideal time to capture and band birds is when they're baby chicks before they can fly. Cavities are monitored for nesting birds with the help of a special video camera.
We're monitoring reproduction so that we can see what pairs are reproducing and how many chicks are fledging from that nest. So when the chicks are between 5 and 10 days old, we can go to the nest. We go in and we noose the chicks out of the nest. We put a unique color band combination on them, and also a USGS band that has a unique number on it, so that when we see that bird in the future with spotting scopes, or we catch that bird out of a cavity, we can identify that bird and know its history.
Once the pedigree of the birds is understood, suitable woodpeckers are targeted for translocation.
We translocate birds from donor or source populations like Fort Benning, Fort Stewart, Eglin Air Force Base, and we move them to places like here on the Shoal Creek Ranger District, where we're trying to establish a solid, sustained population.
At Fort Benning Army Base in Georgia, the red-cockaded woodpecker population is healthy and can afford to donate. On this evening, pre-selected birds are stalked and captured when they fly into roost at dusk.
What we're doing here today now is we've come back in, we verified that it's roosting in this tree right over here, and we've set up our equipment, and as soon as that bird comes in to roost, we will scoot on over to the tree and get the pole up as quickly as possible to cover the cavity, and hopefully it'll come out quickly, and we'll have a bird in hand.
Once a bird is captured, biologists verify the leg bands.
Last digits are 77560.
The captured birds are driven overnight to their new home, over 100 miles away in Talladega National Forest. In the middle of the night, the birds are sealed into an artificial cavity with a detachable mesh net.
We just picked up some birds from Fort Benning and we dropped them off in the Talladega National Forest, and we'll release them tomorrow morning. And this forest will have a new beginning with some new inhabitants.
At sunrise, the woodpecker is released into its new habitat. The process works, and restoration of red-cockaded woodpeckers has been successful.
Progress is good in that we know what we need to do in order to restore and maintain this bird on the landscape. Going from 3,000 birds in 1970, we're up to about 7,500 birds. The RCW is just one of a member of an incredible southern wonder that once spread all across, from Texas to Kentucky to the Virginias and all the way down to Florida. That was a very rich, biologically diverse place in the world. And we only have a fragment of it left, and we should at least keep a fragment.
Down on the forest floor, the gopher tortoise makes good use of the sandy, dry soils often found in longleaf pine forest. This dinosaur-like animal has survived virtually unchanged for hundreds of thousands of years. This vegetarian thrives on the legumes and grasses stimulated by regular low-intensity fire. Thought to live more than 60 years, they do not reach reproductive maturity until they are 10. The gopher tortoise is such an important member of the longleaf community, scientists regard it as a keystone species. The daily life of a gopher tortoise revolves around its burrow. With feet rather than flippers, this turtle likes to dig. Burrows provide underground shelter from weather, predators, and fire. A tortoise may dig 4 or 5 burrows in its territory. Being cold-blooded, gopher tortoises rely on the consistent temperature of the burrow to maintain an ideal metabolism. More than 300 additional animals utilize the burrows, including several threatened or endangered species. If gopher tortoises disappear from the landscape, many other animal species that rely on the burrows will vanish with them. In Florida, homeowners prize the same flat open land favored by the gopher tortoise. Today in Florida, gopher tortoises must be relocated to a sustainable habitat if they are found living on a development site. Carissa Kent focuses on rescuing tortoises from an older permitting system that was grandfathered in.
We started this project back in 2006 to save tortoises off of development sites that specifically had the incidental take permits to bury them alive. The gopher tortoise, since they do have such a slow metabolism, when they get buried alive and there's an impervious surface on top of them, a concrete structure, a house, it takes about 6 months to a year or more for them to slowly suffer and die. This year, we're looking to save over 1,000 tortoises, and right now, as of June, we have saved over 300.
When she gets the call, the first step is to search the property for burrows. When she finds one that looks active, she probes it with a long pole that will act as a guide while they dig.
Hey,
gopher tortoise excavates a single tunnel that typically runs 30 feet in length and 10 feet deep. A home that requires some heavy equipment to open up. Carissa guides a backhoe operator who carefully scrapes away at the tunnel foot by foot.
So he's actually pulling this dirt slowly off of the top of the pipe. We always dig above the pipe just in the very, very, very rare chance that we did not feel the tortoise somewhere in the burrow.
After about 45 minutes, they get close.
Oh, there's a tortoise! She's down like this. I'm touching the bottom of her shell. You can see him moving around a little bit. Take the dirt off the top of the shell. Get all the dirt around him and just gently lift him out. We just gotta go for tortoise. We rescued this little, it is a male. It's a concave plastron, so that means it's a male. Flat plastron is a female. And we just rescued him from entombment. These lots will be built in the next couple months, and they did have an incidental take permit to bury them alive, but the developer allowed us to come in to save these tortoises. We put the tortoise in the simulated burrow, which is this bin, with his own in-chamber dirt, make it as stressless on him as possible, and then we'll cover the bin, put it in a nice shady area, and then he gets transported like this, exactly like this, to the panhandle.
These tortoises are traveling to a private preserve in the Florida Panhandle, Ngozi Plantation. The property focuses on environmental conservation and is a state-designated recipient site for rescued gopher tortoises.
What we're doing here at Ngozi Plantation is for all of these old incidental take permits that are out there in the entire state, and there's hundreds and hundreds of these projects, there's thousands of tortoises left out on these sites, and we're relocating these animals off of those sites and bringing them here to our protected and managed preserve, where they can live out their lives and also reproduce and rebuild the populations on our land. Hey, Carissa.
How you doing, Matt?
Good. How you doing? How was your trip?
Awesome, awesome.
Good. How many we got today?
Got 5 tortoises from Maud Helen over in Apopka, transport log.
Oh, okay.
Before the tortoises can be released, they first must receive a checkup.
All right, I'll take this small one.
Data is collected for future research.
All right, let's have a look at them.
They all look very healthy, no prior injuries.
So 3 adults and 2 juveniles. All right, nice big old female. That's 9.4 pounds.
9.4
Just for reference.
That's a good average size.
Yeah.
A technique called soft release introduces the tortoises to their new home.
So it was found that tortoises kind of had an internal GPS where they try to home back to where they came from. Tortoises will move up to 2 miles a day trying to get back to where they came from. We found that if we do soft release, which is do these large enclosures surrounded with silt fence, it greatly enhances the site acclimation. We'll leave the enclosures up for about a year, and when we take the enclosures down, most of the tortoises will stay either right on the site or in the vicinity of the site.
Along with the enclosure, the team digs what they call starter burrows.
We need to dig starter burrows for them to give them some place to hide from the heat of the day and from predators. But we dig the starter burrows along the fence rather than out in the interior of the enclosure because we found that If you release tortoises out in the middle, they try to leave the site and go back to where they came from. So they encounter this fence and then they'll end up walking directly along the fence. So we need starter burrows at the fence.
Once the digging is complete, the tortoises are released to their new home.
A lot of times people ask, well, why care about something like a gopher tortoise? Many people care about, large megafauna, bears and tigers and lions, but tortoises and some other turtles, they're, not only really important to the ecosystem, but they've been around for millions of years and they've lived their lives unthreatened until human threats have come along. They're protected almost exclusively by their shell. But when human threats come along, roads, development, the shell does not protect them. It's extremely important that we care about these other species that might not be as charismatic.
Another reptile that benefits directly from the gopher tortoise burrow is the non-venomous eastern indigo snake.
Without gopher tortoise burrows, especially through the northern part of the indigo snake's range, we wouldn't have indigo snakes. It'd be very hard for them to survive the winter. It's a strikingly beautiful animal. It's a large animal, the largest snake in North America, largest native snake, at least the longest. Their color is kind of this deep indigo color. Their scales are covered with a kind of an iridescent sheen that in the right light just is brilliant. It just lights the snake up. When you see an animal, they're just really impressive. They're primarily snake-eating snakes. If you look at their Latin name, Drymarchon, it loosely translates into emperor of the forest. They're top predators in this ecosystem. They're different than a lot of other snakes in that, they are wide-ranging. They move all across these southeastern landscapes, searching for all kinds of prey. It has an incredibly strong jaw, and basically it uses that strength to crush its prey and kill it with its mouth and then swallow it whole.
Indigo snakes are very interesting in that they're really the land sharks of the environment. They cruise through different habitats, very domineering animal, and they're basically eating anything they can come across that they can consume.
It is probably extinct, or at least functionally extinct. There may be a couple individuals hanging on, but extinct in about a third of its range.
This is a flagship species for us. It's a key species in the environment, and one that deserves conservation attention.
So the species is an endangered species, and it is on a declining trajectory, and it's a trajectory that we're working very hard to try to turn that. We do have a captive breeding and reintroduction component to our indigo snake initiative. Doing reintroductions of snakes, there have been very few examples of snake populations being restored, and very few that have been successful.
To breed indigo snakes in captivity, the Orion Society set up a unique facility near Orlando, Florida, in the heart of the snake's range.
Here at the Orion Center for Indigo Conservation, we have a breeding program that is now run by Central Florida Zoo. The indigos that are hatched here are destined for reintroduction projects and release back into the wild. In southern Georgia, females over a 4-year period were collected during the winter time. These females were gravid or pregnant at the time of collection. They were taken to Auburn University, where they laid eggs about 3 months later, and then those females were taken back to where they were captured, where they were found, and re-released again. So we kind of borrowed these females, got their eggs, and put them back. And so the colony here at the OCIC is primarily derived from that program. Our founder base for the colony is a very genetically diverse, it's a lovely diversity of animals from different sections in South Georgia. And so we really have a very good opportunity for outbreeding and having very, very strong genetic, really great animals produced here.
An indigo snake is a very difficult animal in some ways to breed in captivity. Oftentimes you can get them to breed, but there's a big problem with getting females to produce viable eggs.
The first couple years when an indigo comes into captivity, they do pretty well as far as reproduction goes, but then that starts to dwindle after year 3 and into year 4 to where females really are negligibly reproductive. And so one of our strategies that we have done here to help alleviate some of these issues in captivity and why reproduction drops off so quick is to build outdoor enclosures. In the enclosures that we built here, they live outside all year round. And so they go through all the seasonal cyclic changes that help reproduction that sometimes you aren't getting inside an enclosure in a reptile house in a zoo. We're really exposing them to the perfect elements. It is working. Over the last 3 years, we've had quite a progression. As the colony has aged and become sexually mature, a few months ago, we hatched 67 indigos.
Mature snakes live in outdoor enclosures year-round and are bred during winter. To beguile amorous behavior from a female, a pair of male snakes is introduced into her enclosure. Usually solitary, the two immediately engage in a form of ritual combat. It definitely attracts her attention. She studies closely to select her mate. Finally, she has made her choice and moves in. When one snake appears to dominate, the submissive one is removed.
That's all right.
Impressed by superior strength, courtship ensues. A few months later, the eggs are collected and incubated.
When an indigo hatches here, it basically stays here for almost 2 years. And so we head start all the snakes to get them to about 3 feet in length. All snakes that are released have pit tags. Any researcher down the road will be able to take a pit tag reader if they find an indigo snake in the wild, scan it, and know exactly who he is. You'll be able to track these animals over the years and see how successful your program is.
For the next few years, snakes hatched and raised here are destined for the Conecuh National Forest in southern Alabama. Once suitable candidates are selected, they are packed up and driven overnight to their new home. Just prior to the release, they receive one last checkup. The snakes get measured and weighed and have their pit tags scanned and logged.
808.2.
The habitat here at Conecuh is a protected habitat. It's a national forest. It's been restored towards longleaf pine wiregrass ecosystem. They've done a lot of work prepping this for the release of indigo snakes.
Is it 218 or Z18?
It's 2, I think. Fred, that's
218.
218.
The model is for the release of 300 indigo snakes over a 10 to 12 year period. And so we're about a third of the way through that process right now, and we'll actually be accelerating releases as the years come. This is a very unique program. There are very few captive breeding reintroduction snake programs in the world. And our partnership with Auburn University, Zoo Atlanta, the Orient Society, and Central Florida Zoo has made this really coalesce and come together to reestablish the eastern indigo snake for the first time in 60 years in the state of Alabama.
An unusual and exotic plant species that is found almost exclusively in the longleaf pine forest is the pitcher plant.
A pitcher plant is a carnivorous plant. It's one of a group of carnivorous plants, and the southeastern United States is home to many different species. Pitcher plant is especially adapted to grow in environments where there are not a lot of nutrients, and it captures prey to make up the difference.
They can eat pretty much anything that can fit into the opening of the plant, and depending on the species, the opening varies, the size and the shape. So there are some species that have tiny openings so they can eat beetles, tiny beetles, and ants. Some have pretty large openings, so they can eat moths and butterflies and spiders and grasshoppers and anything basically that'll fit in there.
A lot of the natural pitcher plant bogs have been converted to other uses. We're left with only about 3% of the longleaf pine ecosystem in the southeastern United States, and then a smaller portion of that are the wetlands where these plants grow. Pitcher plants are really cool for many reasons, and one of those reasons is because they produce leaves that are adapted to capture insects. So these leaves are coming up from an underground stem called a rhizome, and each year the pitcher plant is going to produce new leaves.
Some species have hairs around the lip on the inside pointing downward. So if an unfortunate bug happens to get over inside the trap, the hairs inside point downward so it can't climb up because it's constantly sliding down. They can make a nectar around the rim of the opening. So the bug comes in and enjoys the nectar. There has been some research that suggests there's an insect liquor in there that intoxicates the bug, so it's not functioning as well, so it increases the chances of it actually falling over into the trap.
In southern Alabama, the Nature Conservancy maintains the Splinter Hill Bog Preserve. The property is home to one of the largest seepage bogs remaining on the coastal plain, and home to more than 12 species of carnivorous plants, including 5 species of pitcher plants. Will collects fluid samples from the pitchers that he brings back to the University of Georgia for genetic testing.
So we are interested in the genetics of the plant as well as the genetics of the microbes inside the plant. So the interior of the plant, which can be aquatic in some species, sets up a micro-ecosystem that is not unlike your gut. There are hundreds of species of yeast and mold and bacteria that live in the fluid that help the plant to mineralize whatever it captures. And the plant has specialized cells at the base to absorb the nutrients once the prey decomposes.
Because of habitat loss, many species of carnivorous plants in the southeast are considered threatened or endangered.
You can drive past or walk past and not notice a plant like this until someone says, hey, look what's happening. And people just don't believe that a plant can eat bugs. And so they look inside and they see like a decomposing cricket or a spider or whatnot, and it just blows their mind. And so if they don't know it's here, and they never know it's here, and we lose that habitat, they'll never know the plant existed there. So it's a sad situation when you lose a habitat and people never knew what existed there, because they're pretty cool plants.
A unique creature that thrives in the open spaces created by regular fire is the Florida harvester ant. There are 22 species of harvester ants in the United States, but only one found east of the Mississippi River.
It's called the Florida harvester ant, but it's actually, the range is from approximately Louisiana to southern North Carolina. And it's typical of the coastal plains in sandy soils. The distinctive feature of its natural history is that it collects and stores seeds in underground chambers, and then presumably uses those during lean times.
We know relatively little about these insects, but what we do know is remarkable.
The colonies start as a single individual, the mated queen. But once workers have been produced, colonies grow from, a handful of workers to a maximum of about 10,000. The biggest I've ever found has been 11,000 workers. The colonies are long-lived. I'm estimating about 20 years. And that means that the queen, the mother of the colony, lives for 20 years. The workers, on the other hand, live much shorter periods of time. If they were born in the late part of the summer, they live approximately a year.
Florida harvester ants live in a sophisticated and tightly organized society. Individuals perform their different tasks in precise unity for the better of the colony overall. Scientists consider highly social animals like these to be what are called superorganisms. The individuals of an ant colony are so closely interconnected that the entire colony should be considered an individual, a superorganism. Dr. Schinkel studies the architecture of the nests of the Florida harvester ant.
I reason that the nest architecture is somehow an important part of how the superorganism works. They do make quite attractive and elaborate and large nests. The deepest I've ever found is about almost 9 feet deep. So they're big, and if you measure the volume of the chambers, they can be up to 8 or 10 liters of chambers. So that's quite big. One of the items of interest is how are the ants distributed vertically within that nest, because that's part of how the superorganism is organized. We've discovered over the years I've worked on it that the younger workers are usually near the bottom of the nest, and they do things like brood care. And as they age, they gradually move up into higher chambers, and they change their jobs. So they become more general nest workers. They may process food, they may transport seeds, they may do sanitation work, maybe excavation, and so on. So that vertical organization is an integral part of how the superorganism works. because there's a continuous flow of workers produced at the bottom, flowing upward, changing tasks as they do, and therefore allocating the right amount of labor at the right place and the right time to each of the tasks that the colony needs to do.
To understand the architecture of the nests and which individuals occupy which chambers, Dr. Schinkel and his students carefully excavate the nests centimeter by centimeter.
The biggest chambers are near the surface, so what we're going to see is these very complex big chambers at the surface, and then as we go down they'll get simpler and smaller. And the trick is to expose them in a way that doesn't destroy them.
As chambers are exposed, the contents are collected with the help of a vacuum and brought to the lab for further study. Eventually, they uncover chambers full of seeds.
The first seeds. So that's a pretty nice example of a seed chamber.
They also collect architectural data.
In order to record what we see, I put a piece of acetate, clear acetate, over the exposed chamber and just simply draw the outlines with a marking pen.
The tracings create a 3D model of the nest. But Dr. Schinkel wanted to see even more detail, and he came up with a novel idea of making an aluminum cast of the nests. The process starts by locating a suitable nest.
Colonies, for reasons we don't understand, but it's part of their life cycle, move on the average of about once a year. And when they do, a group of foragers goes off some distance, usually an average of about 4 meters away, and it starts a new nest. The remarkable thing about this nest and its architecture is that it's all created in a 4 to 6 day period when the colony moves. If you excavate the old nest and you excavate the new nest, they're essentially alike. It kind of makes a mystery out of why they move, and we don't really know. All I can say is it's part of their life history, and they move regularly.
The regular movement of the colonies gives Dr. Schinkel an ideal opportunity for casting.
I developed a way of melting metal, aluminum, in the field. This kiln will produce 6 or 7 liters of red-hot aluminum in 1 to 2 hours. Then we pull the red-hot aluminum bucket out of the kiln, and this is a 2-person job. With tongs, we just simply pour it into the nest opening. So the metal cools very quickly. It freezes in 3 or 4 minutes, and then you can start digging it out. So you dig a pit next to the cast and go in from the side, find where the cast is. It's still quite hot. And you will simply excavate this hardened aluminum cast.
Slowly, like an archaeology dig, the nest reveals its architecture.
Let's put it over here. Okay, let me tilt it. Good.
The nests are often so deep, it can take several pours to complete the cast.
Unfortunately, it makes it sort of fragile. Let's turn it on its top.
After more pouring and digging, we finally see the complete nest.
This is actually a colony that made this nest that we cast. They cast, the nest was over there where the pit is now. And this colony moved from that location to here like a few days ago. So that colony produced this space underground. And the orientation here is that this is the top, so the entrance is here. So all of that sand that you see there, which is probably about the same volume as this nest, the ants brought up in 4 or 6 days.
All of these plants and animals are part of an incredibly rare landscape. But a landscape that through the efforts of many is expanding.
The longleaf pine itself is not an endangered species, but the system that we find longleaf pine in is very threatened. The longleaf pine is only found in the southeastern United States, from Virginia to East Texas. The majority of the land in the southeastern United States is in private ownership. If we do not work with the private landowner, we cannot conserve the longleaf pine ecosystem. People that manage quail, that hunt quail, require an area that has scattered pines, that has an understory of lush vegetation, grasses, and forbs where the quail can hide, they can find cover, they can find the insects that they need. And without the quail hunting that started in the late 1800s up through the early 1900s, these large holdings of beautiful, intact longleaf pine forest would have been cleared for agriculture, would have been cleared for development. We wouldn't have them today if it hadn't been for quail hunting. The longleaf pine ecosystem was at a height of 90 million acres. It declined tremendously down to about 3 million. Today, we're up to 4.7 million acres. And in the last 20 years, we figured out how to grow the trees, we figured out how to manage the system, we figured out how to bring the animals back. The restoration of the longleaf pine ecosystem is probably one of the most positive ecological restoration stories today. The longleaf pine landscape is the landscape of the South, and we're part of it. It's within our hands to conserve this ecosystem and to expand it so that our children and our grandchildren and the next generation will be able to experience what our great-grandfathers experienced and our grandfathers experienced.